You're always last. My dad nodded like it was basic math. My sister smirked into her wine. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just said, good to know. Because something snapped in that moment. Not my heart, my loyalty. Before I tell you what I did next, take a second to hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. And tell me, have you ever realized you were last in your own family? My name is Mia, and for most of my life, I learned my place without anyone ever sitting me down to explain it. No speeches, no rules posted on the fridge, just patterns, quiet ones, the kind you only recognize after they've shaped you. I grew up in a house in Denver that looked ordinary from the outside. Trim lawn, neutral paint, family photos by the front door. But if you stood still long enough inside that house, you could feel how attention moved, how it flowed quickly toward one person, and how it slowed, thinned out before it ever reached me. My sister had a gravity I didn't. Conversations bent toward her. Plans were made around her schedule. When something went wrong, people rushed. When something went right, they celebrated loudly. I learned early that my role was different. I was the one who didn't need much, the one who could handle it, the one everyone described as strong, like it was a compliment instead of a warning. I didn't grow up unloved. That's the complicated part. I was loved in theory, in reassurance, in phrases like, you'll be fine and you're so independent. Love that sounded generous but came with an unspoken condition. Don't ask for more, don't take up space, don't need us the way she does. I noticed it in small moments. Birthday mornings where my cake came from the grocery store on the way home while hers was ordered weeks ahead. Family trips where my suitcase stayed in the closet because I was better off saving for school. Graduation days where I took photos for everyone else and stood off to the side holding jackets, watching milestones happen without me in the frame. When I left for community college, no one cried at the airport. There wasn't an airport actually, just a quick hug in the driveway and a reminder to call when I got there. I paid my own way, worked extra shifts, learned how to stretch money and time because I had to. And every time I succeeded, it quietly reinforced the story my parents told themselves. See, she's fine. She doesn't need us. Years later, when I moved to Seattle for work, the pattern didn't change. Phone calls were brief. Updates about my life were acknowledged, then redirected. How's work? That's good. Did you hear what your sister's dealing with right now? I became fluent in listening in, being supportive, and staying calm while my own life unfolded off to the side. By the time of that dinner, the one where my mother finally said the words out loud, I already knew where I stood. What shocked me wasn't the ranking. It was how comfortable they were saying it. As if it had always been obvious, as if I had agreed, and maybe in some quiet way I had. After that dinner, nothing changed on the surface, and that was the point. My parents didn't call to check in. My sister didn't apologize. Life continued smooth and uninterrupted, as if they hadn't just said the quiet part out loud. But something had shifted in me. The requests kept coming just like before. A text from my mom asking if I could watch the kids just for a few hours. A casual mention of bills piling up said lightly like a weather update. My sister forwarding a message about a payment that accidentally bounced followed by a laughing emoji. No one asked directly. They never had to. The assumption was enough. I noticed how automatic my old responses had been. Of course, no problem, I'll figure it out. This time I didn't answer right away. At first it felt wrong, like I was breaking some invisible rule. I'd see my phone light up and feel that familiar pull in my chest, the reflex to smooth things over before they escalated. Instead, I let the phone sit on the counter. I finished my coffee. I went to work. I lived my day. And nothing exploded. That realization was unsettling. The world didn't collapse because I didn't step in immediately. No emergencies, no disasters, just silence. Followed later by a second message, then a third, more pointed one. Are you okay? You've been quiet. I was quiet because I was paying attention. I started looking at my own life with the same clarity I brought to my work, my finances, my schedule, my energy. I realized how much of it had been quietly allocated to everyone else. Money that drifted out in small, regular amounts. Time I kept flexible just in case. Plans I never fully committed to because someone might need me. So, I began separating things, not dramatically, not with announcements, just practically. I moved money into accounts that were mine alone. I canceled shared access. I stopped covering small payments that had never been discussed, only expected. When my sister asked if I could spot her for now, I replied with a simple, "I can't." No explanation, no apology. The reaction was immediate. My mom called, her voice tight with concern that felt more like confusion. "Is everything okay?" "You seem distant." I told her the truth. "I'm just busy." She paused as if waiting for the rest of the sentence. When it didn't come, she filled the space herself. "You know your sister's under a lot of pressure right now." I did know. I had always known. What I was realizing was that knowing didn't make it my responsibility. That was the turning point. Not a fight, not a dramatic declaration, just the moment I understood that being the strong one had become a convenient excuse for everyone else to stop carrying their share. I didn't know then how soon they would really test that boundary, but I was about to find out. The call came on a weekday afternoon right as I was finishing a meeting. I could hear it before anyone said a word. That edge in my mom's voice, tight, rushed. The sound of someone trying to stay calm while standing on unstable ground. "We need to talk," she said. "Can you come by this weekend?" She didn't explain. She didn't have to. By then, I'd learned the language. When my family used urgency without details, it meant something had gone wrong, something expensive. When I arrived in Denver, the house felt heavier than I remembered. The air stale. The living room table buried under stacks of envelopes and loose papers, bills, notices, printouts that looked official enough to be frightening. My sister sat rigid on the couch, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. My dad avoided my gaze entirely. They didn't ask how I was. No one ever does in moments like that. My mom started talking fast words, tumbling over each other. A business decision that didn't pan out. Payments that had been delayed. A few contracts signed with optimism and very little margin for error. She kept using the word temporary, like repeating it might make it true. I listened without interrupting, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the way I always had. Then came the pause, the collective inhale, the moment they all looked at me. "Well," my dad said, finally clearing his throat, "you're in a stable place. You don't have kids. You can handle this better than most." There it was. The assumption, the expectation, dressed up as logic. They didn't say the words outright, but they didn't need to. They expected me to cover the gap, to smooth the crisis, to make the numbers work the way I always had. My sister glanced up at me, then fear flickering across her face before settling into something else. Relief. As if the solution had just walked through the door. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked a question. "What's the plan if I don't?" The room went quiet. Too quiet. My mom looked hurt. My dad looked confused. My sister looked panicked. It was like I had spoken in a language they didn't recognize. Not helping had never been part of the equation. "I need time," I said calmly. To understand everything, they nodded too quickly. Grateful, certain. They assumed time meant I was calculating how much I could give, not whether I would. That night, back in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and felt something settle inside me, a resolve that didn't come from anger, but from clarity. The next morning, I made 2 appointments, one with my therapist, one with a legal advisor. If I was going to step into this mess, it wouldn't be as the family's safety net. It would be on my terms. When I came back the following weekend, I didn't arrive with answers. I arrived with clarity. The house looked the same as it always had, but the energy inside it felt different, tighter, desperate, the kind of quiet that comes from people waiting to be rescued. Papers were still spread across the table, now more organized, stacked into piles like someone had tried to make chaos look manageable. Bills here, payments there, a few contracts clipped together, corners bent from nervous handling. My parents were already seated. My sister sat beside them, her husband hovering near the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was welcome in the room where the damage had been assessed. No one smiled when I walked in. No one offered coffee. My mom broke the silence first. "We're really glad you came," she said, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her voice carried that brittle softness I knew well, the tone she used when she needed something but didn't want to say it out loud. I sat down slowly and placed my bag at my feet. "Let's talk," I said. My dad cleared his throat and launched into an explanation I'd already heard. The downturn, the delays, the bad timing. He spoke like a man presenting a case he'd rehearsed all week, hoping confidence might replace accountability. My sister nodded along, eyes glossy, occasionally adding a detail about stress or the kids or how none of this was supposed to happen. Eventually, the words ran out. That's when my mom leaned forward. "We just need help getting through this part," she said. "Once things stabilize." "How much?" I asked. She blinked. My dad hesitated. My sister inhaled sharply, then answered for them. A number rounded heavy-spoken carefully, as if the way she said it might make it sound smaller. And after that, I asked, "What's the plan?" My dad frowned. "What do you mean?" I said evenly. "What changes?" "So this doesn't happen again." The question landed wrong. My mom's expression tightened. "Mia, this isn't the time to interrogate us?" I nodded slowly. "Then it's not the time for me to write a check." The room shifted. My sister sat up straighter. "We're family," she said, her voice rising just enough to carry emotion without crossing into accusation. "This isn't about plans. It's about helping." "Helping who?" I asked. She looked at me like the answer was obvious. "Us." I glanced around the room. "And who's helping me?" No one spoke. My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're in a different position," he said. "You don't have the same responsibilities. You're single, you're stable, you can afford to step in." There it was. The logic I'd heard my entire life, the math that always ended with me absorbing the cost. "I can afford to step in," I said carefully, "because I've spent years planning my life as if no one would ever catch me if I fell." My mom's eyes filled. "We didn't know you felt like that." I met her gaze. "You did. You just didn't think it mattered." The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was discomfort. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it onto the table between us. The movement was slow, deliberate. Every eye followed it. "This is what I'm willing to do," I said, "and this is how." My dad opened the folder first, his eyebrows knit together as he scanned the first page, then the next. My mom leaned over his shoulder. My sister craned her neck, her face draining of color. "This is a loan," my dad said flatly. "Yes," I replied with clear terms. My sister shook her head. "Why are there conditions?" "Because this isn't an emergency donation," I said. "It's structured help." My mom's voice trembled. "You don't trust us." "I trust patterns," I said quietly. "And this pattern has been in place my entire life. The conditions weren't cruel. They weren't punitive. They were practical. Assets had to be sold before any money changed hands. Spending had to be documented. No new financial commitments without proof of sustainability. Family therapy not as a suggestion, but as a requirement. And a written agreement that my name, my credit, and my future would never again be assumed as backup. My dad pushed the folder away from him. "This is cold," he said. "This is how banks treat people." I nodded. "Then treat me like a bank, because when you needed emotional support, I was family. When you needed money, I was infrastructure." My sister's eyes filled with tears. "So you're punishing us now." I shook my head. "I'm stopping the punishment of me." She looked at our parents, then back at me. "If you don't help us, we lose everything." I held her gaze. "If I help without boundaries, I lose everything I've built." The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. My mom reached for my hand, then hesitated as if unsure whether she still had the right. "We never meant to make you feel last." I gently pulled my hand back. "But you did. And you said it out loud." No one argued with that. My dad stared at the paperwork, jaw tight. "So this is it," he said. "Sign or sink." "No," I corrected him. "This is grow or repeat." Time stretched. Minutes passed. My sister wiped her cheeks, her husband pacing behind her. My parents whispered to each other in low, frantic tones. For the first time in my life, I wasn't feeling the silence. I wasn't offering solutions or softening edges. I waited. Finally, my dad looked up. We need time. I nodded. You have 24 hours. My sister's head snapped up. That's it. That's it, I said, standing. Tomorrow I'll come back. Either we move forward with this or we don't move forward at all. As I walked toward the door, my mom called my name. If we say no, she asked, voice breaking, are you walking away? I paused my hand on the doorknob. I'm not walking away from you, I said. I'm walking toward myself. The next day, when I returned, the papers were signed. No speeches, no apologies wrapped in excuses, just shaky signatures and tired faces. The relief in the room was real, but so was the loss. Something had shifted permanently. As I gathered my things to leave, my sister looked at me differently than she ever had before. Not with superiority, not with expectation, with uncertainty. And for the first time, that wasn't my problem to fix. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in quiet steps, each one heavier than the last. The first change was practical. Assets were listed, subscriptions were canceled, expenses were tracked instead of ignored. The numbers stopped being abstract and started becoming limits. My parents downsized their expectations before they downsized anything else, and that alone shifted the tone of every conversation. I stopped bracing myself every time my phone buzzed. When my mom called, it was to ask how I was not what I could do. When my sister texted, it wasn't followed by a request. The biggest change wasn't theirs, though. It was mine. I no longer felt responsible for maintaining the illusion that everything was fine. I didn't rush to prove my worth by fixing problems that weren't mine. I learned that boundaries don't erase love. They define where it can exist without destroying you. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something simple and profound. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. And that made all the difference. For a long time, I thought being last in my family meant I needed to try harder, give more, stay quieter. I was wrong. Being last was never a position to fight for. It was a sign to step out of the line entirely and build a life where my value didn't depend on sacrifice. If this story felt uncomfortably familiar, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. And if stories like this help you breathe a little easier, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next.